Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Hello, gorgeous ones. Welcome, welcome. In today's society, women are often feeling unheard, unseen, burdened and burned out, trapped in a life of looking after everyone else whilst they've got some nagging frustration and shame that life isn't quite what they'd imagined. If you're numbing your body screams and have a secret gnawing feeling you're here to be something more, yet you feel unworthy and doubt your own power to dream bigger and create a magical life, I've created a powerful portal of transformation called Invoke Your Wild Creatrix that guides you into the path of body wisdom, soul alchemy, and manifestation. Beginning October, we'll be guiding you to get intimately in touch with your heart, fall in love with your witchy self, illuminate your soul's deepest desires, and listen to the intuitive wisdom of your beautiful body so that you can courageously choose into dreaming bigger and recognize yourself as a powerful creatrix, capable of intentional manifestation of a magical life. Find out more at www.nicolbarton.co.uk/invoke-your-wild-creatrix. Welcome. In today's episode, I am delighted to be freestyling on the wild topic of how to soulfully embody the power of Mother Earth's natural cycles. Most secret witches have been disconnected from the wild and their bodies, or if they do connect with the wild, they will have been doing it unconsciously, and yet there is another way to commune with the wild that will allow you to embody your soul path. In this episode, I illuminate how important the wild is in walking the magical path and how you are wild and can co-create with the wild. I help you discover the natural cycles Mother Earth offers, which can support you in listening more deeply into your body, and I illuminate how Mother Earth's powerful cycles can be harnessed to embody the path of soul. And I invite you into conscious liberation of your witch wounds by intentionally harnessing rewilding. Let's dive in. Welcome, welcome loves. Today we are here to talk about how to soulfully embody the power of Mother Earth's cycles. So ultimately we are here to talk about how nature and the wild can lead us deeper into the path of soul embodiment. And funnily enough, by some strange synchronicity, I've ended up to be recording this today on Friday the 13th, and that is actually pure synchronicity because I wasn't actually intending to be ready to create it today, and yet here I am. So magically, this is perfect. And the reason why is just before I was going to record it, a post popped up from a rewilding page I follow, and actually one of my group members posted something which was pretty much saying the same thing, and it was all about how Friday the 13th is actually the day of the divine feminine, and it really got me thinking about how Mother Earth is the ultimate goddess. And really, so that's where it feels that we must start this episode, because when we're talking about liberating the secret witch wounds, of stepping into the unique truth of who we really are, despite what the rest of the spiritless world thinks about that. And really, the embodied fear of this wound of being killed, really, to put it bluntly, which is what ultimately this podcast is here to do. We're here to kind of address the witch wounds, and we're talking archetypally about the witch goddess. The the witch being kind of a powerful story to help us highlight where our struggles are and where we can step more into our power. Of course, then, why not talk about nature in the same way as the powerful goddess that she really is? So Mother Earth, whatever you decide to call her, ultimately, these are powerful lenses for the beauty of the wild. Now, the post that I was talking about said that before patriarchal times, Friday the 13th was the day of the goddess, and it was considered a day to worship the divine feminine that lives in us all and to really honour the cycles of creation. And it was considered a very powerful day to manifest, honour creativity and to celebrate the beauty, wisdom and nourishment of the soul. Something really that witches would have then gone on to be burned for doing. And I actually spoke to this witch wound in my Secret Witch Circle Facebook group this morning, as I'm doing a weekly series over in the Facebook group where I freestyle from the heart, unapologetically, provocatively, on how we can liberate our victimhood of the witch wound. And so yeah, that was it was just all such synchronicity this morning. I loved it, and there were the number 11 was appearing everywhere as well, because the video that I actually recorded was 11 minutes and 11 seconds long. And talking about number significance, then, by the way, the number 13 is also significant because there are 13 moon cycles a year, and the average female has 13 periods each year, and that's actually something that this post also said. So there you go. Actually could not be a more perfect time for me to be addressing the witch wound on the day when witches would traditionally have worshipped the mother goddess's cycles themselves, despite it being unsafe for them to do so. So we're going to follow in their footsteps today and be celebrating the divine feminine goddess, Mother Earth, and all her magical cycles, so that our magic, our unique personal soul gifts, can begin to feel safe again for us to venture into. So we are not victims to that wound, just to be clear. And we have to illuminate the wound for us to be able to heal it. So this episode is an invitation to you into walking the path of magic and taking the aligned action of reclaiming your shadowy witch wounds, and instead choosing into reconnecting to the wild to begin that journey of reconnecting to your wisdom. And although I say we can choose out of the wound and we're not victims to that wound, until we see that, and again, you might not even be clear of what that wound was until you've listened, and to be clear again, that wound is really about ultimately the fear of being burned to death for being ourselves. That fear of stepping fully into yourself is real, and you can still choose into it. And embodying Mother Earth cycles and the wild is one of those first steps along the path of becoming who you came here to be. So there was just a slight detour there at the beginning of the episode for you. so yeah, we'll get back to the topic. And ultimately, when we are discussing how Mother Earth cycles can help us embody our soul, this is really about us cultivating a deeper relationship with ourselves by being in the cycles of the wild. And obviously, the wild is a place where we can really begin to get back in touch with our truth. So when we talk about, I just wanted to highlight this actually, when we talk about the journey from secret witch to wild witch, because I often describe the liberated witch using the word wild, I just want to make it clear that by this word, I don't just mean wild as in just speaking your truth unconsciously. As in, much of self-help this is promoted, it's kind of like, well, we'll speak our truth, we'll be, outspoken, bolshy, over the top, and call that wild. Kind of a little bit of a rebel vibe going on there. And by the way, what I want to point out here is that actually that's also just a shadowy way of just being a little bit of a rebel, instead of being your fullest, most truthful, authentic self from the heart. So what we're actually talking about here today is about us rewilding to our natural essence, to our natural way of being, to the organic truth of who we are and who we are in our hearts. And ultimately that is nature. I mean, We came from nature, we came from the wild. So when we want to discover our soul, which ultimately is the essence of who we came here to be, then naturally the wild and Mother Earth cycles is one of the places we can begin to do this. So let's start with why we even want to rewild and get more in tune with nature's cycles, and how this helps us along the magical path towards soul, or who we long to become. So the aim of embodying Mother Earth cycles is to really reconnect to who we are from love and strip back all of the stories about who we are, including that kind of bolshy, wild, dominant, aggressive feminine, so often portrayed when you think of the wild. So then when we do that, we can begin to really hear what is actually for us and co-create with the wild to live magical lives. And one of my favourite quotes, I don't actually remember off the top of my head right now where it came from, I'll have to find it after, but one of my favourite quotes is, "Mother Nature reveals her secrets to those who walk her paths." And it got me thinking as well when I was thinking about this quote, because I realised even just yesterday, I think it was when I was on a walk, that when I'm out walking, and I often go for walks with Lily, who also really, really loves nature, and she is a wild one. I can tell you that. So yeah, she's a great model of how the wild helps us be wild. But yeah, as I was on a walk in nature, I realised that the wind actually talks to me, and it kind of whispers to me. And I was listening to it the other day, and it was just inviting me to immerse myself even deeper into nature. And I remember going glamping recently as well, and staying in a yurt in Glastonbury. And I really did remember, because we forget when we're inside. And obviously we live in the modern world, we live in houses, we live indoors, and we don't spend as much time outdoors as we previously would. And so going glamping recently, I was showering outdoors, I was, walking barefoot through the grass from the shower to the yurt, and I just forgot and realised in the moment how gorgeous it is to shower outdoors and how alive it feels to be outdoors. And it's like when we're in the wild, like fully deeply in the wild, it's like we reclaim all the parts of us that we forget about when we're stuck in our homes. So being in nature really helps us reconnect to that aliveness, which is our essence. And I think there's also a kind of clarity that you can receive when you're in the wild. And this is because in the wild, we are not surrounded by the noise of the mundane world, of our everyday lives. There's no distractions of the kind of spiritless society that we live in. We can't be judged except by ourselves. We're not surrounded by voices asking more of us. We aren't kind of seeking love, approval, or safety from the wild. We're just free to be ourselves, and we're literally immersing ourselves in magic instead. And we can see the power of this magic if you imagine the power that we can witness in nature. For example, I remember as well immersing myself in a waterfall in Bali. I visited several waterfalls in Bali, and I just remember the sheer kind of magic and kind of, I don't know, I can't even think of a word to describe it, just the absolute power of water just naturally falling down a waterfall. And yeah, it's just so wild, and the magic in that moment is huge because there is just so much power in the natural world. And that's the same in us. There is the same power, it's just that we're in a different form. So it's also proven that we do feel better when we're in the wild. So I've watched programs where doctors have recommended wild swimming to lift your mood. If we get ill, we can use essential oils and plant medicine. We can eat from the land. My guest, actually, Selena Walker, dived deeper into all of this in the podcast, the last episode of the podcast. So do go back and listen to that if you want to hear more on that. But ultimately, as she said, we forget that we are wild animals who live in a modern society, and we forget that's who we are. We are wild animals. So I guess firstly, we need to see that we are Mother Earth. We are wild animals. Returning to the wild can help us get back in touch with our truth, with the natural rhythms of our body, with who we are, ultimately, who we always have been. And again, of course, the more that we can reconnect to Mother Earth's cycles, the more we remember who we are, and we remember that we are wild, that we're miraculous, and that we don't really understand the miracle of who we are. The wild is just as big a mystery as we are, just as we can't understand Mother Nature herself. And so, yet, there's a distinction to make here, because what we're talking about here is often what I refer to as the Ascension Path, and this is basically a knowing that we are part of the greater intelligence of the universe. This is a path that I have trodden myself, and it's a really useful and important part of the path, because without knowing that we're part of this greater intelligence of the universe, that we're part of nature, then we don't know who we are at the deeper truth of who we are, and we can't understand how we can harness that and embrace that in order to co-create magical lives. So ascension is a really important part of the path, this knowing that nature has a divine intelligence to it that we don't understand. The trees grow their leaves and they don't worry when they fall off because they know they'll grow back. Medicine grows where it's needed. There's this beautiful intellect in nature that we can't possibly figure out, and we are also part of that. So if you haven't walked the Ascension Path and you're hearing that for the first time, that might be like, oh wow. So I don't know, but yeah, let that one sink in. But if that's kind of familiar to you, the other thing I'd like to point to is that still that's also not all that is needed. So for true, powerful soul embodiment, there's a clue in the word embodiment. Because we also need to realise that we're also humans, as well as being part of nature, with unique gifts, unique wounds, accessed in our bodies. And so to embody our soul, we have to co-create with the wild. And this is kind of the path of descension that we talk a lot about here. This path to soul, this kind of accessing deeper connection to our bodies in order to become who we want to be. So we want to embody the wild's power in order to co-create magical lives. And there's a quote I found again, I don't know where this quote came from, so I should really start finding where my quotes are from. But there is a quote I found on this, which says, in order to create change, which is basically magic, people need to become aware of their sensations and the way their bodies interact with the world around them. Physical self-awareness is the first step in releasing the tyranny of the past. And so, I love that. When we begin to journey into the path of soul embodiment and being in our bodies is a huge part of this. And so, purposefully, one important step in the path of living your wild alchemy, which is the path that I share, is embodiment. So as creating magic is a process, part of my 7-point path that I created to help people live their wild alchemy and be the magic that they came here to be is embodied rewilding. That is a part of the path. So when I'm sharing, everything I'm sharing here is around that path. So I'm giving you as much as I possibly can around this path. And yeah, embodied rewilding is a very important part of that. And it's embodiment in the wild is an important part of the path that helps us to tune into our bodies to really begin to discover the sensations and signals that point us towards our unique soul gift. Because what often happens is that women who are powerful don't really see their power, and they've been struggling to sense their power because they've been trapping themselves in a mundane world. What I mean by that is they often switch off to their bodies because there's so much to keep up with in this hectic kind of pace of modern world that they give away their power to keeping everybody happy, people pleasing, and kind of selling their soul in return for love, approval, and safety. And the reason that they can't see their power is because they've disconnected from their bodies. So usually a bit of rewilding offers women the opportunity to begin to switch off that noise and begin to start listening to their unique souls. So that's things like their body signals, which in turn helps them to see their hopes, their dreams. And one of the first things I often invite people into as part of my process is things like going for a wild wander. And whilst you're doing that, sensing into what comes up for them as they walk around and kind of sense into their wild desires. And in the safe space of the wild, this is actually a really powerful and safe place for women to begin to take the tender first steps into actually listening to themselves without the noise of the world around them. The wild is really critical to this path. So there's also a lot that we can learn from the wild about trauma. So I've mentioned before, Peter Levine shares in his book, Waking the Tiger, and I've done an episode about this entirely on tending your nervous system. So if you're interested in that, then go and listen to that episode. But he talks about how in the wild, animals naturally shake, which is very unlike humans. We're not used to kind of processing our trauma in that way. But animals naturally release the deep tension and physiological triggering which happens during a stress response. So humans don't do this, and that's why they get left with trauma in their bodies, kind of stuck. So you can see how the wild is a really helpful thing in a way that the unnatural world isn't, and why the more time we can spend in the wild can help us be more fully embodied. So embodying the power of Mother Earth's cycles is a really important part of the path of liberating your secret witch ways of being. And as I said, the secret witch often feels total disconnection from her body, let alone her magic. She will often shut off the wild, shut down her wild instincts in order to serve her family, people please, do what's expected of her, and put herself last. So you can see why, given that the wild firstly helps you switch off from all of that and rediscover your intuition and wisdom and begin to hear your body and discover your soul's desires and dreams, it's really important. And secondly, it helps you begin to see that you are also part of the greater intelligence and power of life. And that is kind of also crucial to living your magic, because without embodying the wild, it's likely that you won't have access to either your body or knowing that you are kind of part of something greater. And therefore, it's very difficult to co-create from those two things to walk the path of soul. So it is really critical to embody the power of Mother Earth's cycles. And it involves becoming really in tune with your body's cycles and the cycles of nature. Because if we're talking about manifesting, this is about aligning our bodies with the cycles of the divine and co-creating from there. That's a lot, huh? So basically, returning to the wild and Mother Earth's cycles isn't just a one-off random nice thing to do. It's not, and you may well have experienced it like that. You might have just gone for a nice walk and thought, oh, this is wonderful. That is likely how the secret witch just kind of plays with all of this stuff. But actually, what we're talking about here is intentional reconnection and rewilding as a kind of essential part of the path. And rewilding is an essential part of soul embodiment, because it's where we reconnect to our deeper selves, our wild instincts, our dreams, our bodies, who we actually came here to be. So this is about intentional soulful embodiment of the power of Mother Earth cycles. And that's what makes it a little bit edgier, so I'll come back to that later. But I'm going to go into now how we actually begin to embody nature's wild cycles. So you're like, yeah, got that, but how? So basically, by reconnecting with the wild as much as possible, we begin to remember the magic that we truly are. And we also begin to listen to the wild guidance of our bodies in order to hear the call of soul. But how do we begin that process? Well, firstly, it'd be good to discuss the types of wild cycles that are helpful for us to embody ourselves in. And as a woman, this is particularly important because we are cyclical beings. By that I mean we experience our own cycles, our own rhythms of our body, which are important to be aware of. And so each of our own inner seasons will require a different level of support from the wild. And by that, I really mean that we have different needs and different requirements at each different stage of our different cycles. And so as a woman particularly, the way that we create is heavily within a cycle. And in nature, there are all different types of cycles, the most prominent being the cycle of death and rebirth. And this kind of death rebirth cycle is evident in all of the wild, from the food chain to the way the leaves die and regrow. It's one of the most embodied lessons from nature that I can see in terms of how transformation works. Because each cycle evident in nature is really teaching us that we can evolve, that we do evolve, that we can transform, and that we have possibility to become whoever we desire to be. Ultimately, that we can rebirth ourselves as whoever we long to become. And the wild also teaches us that for that to happen, we have to accept death to old ways of being. Now, birth and death is really one of the most obvious cycles in nature. And in stepping into the path of soul, it really is a vital lesson that we have to embody, because the old pieces of us, the old ways of being that no longer serve us, have got to be liberated in order to embody our soul fully. For us to truly become the woman that we long to become, i.e. our authentic selves, we will need the woman that we currently are in the ways that no longer serves us. She needs to die. And Mother Earth circles teach us so graciously that that's okay. So that was one of my first things to talk about, because that is actually really powerful in realizing the kind of birth and death cycle. Then, of course, the other cycles in nature are the seasons, which also teaches that the world is continually evolving as well. So we've got winter, spring, summer and autumn, which change our world entirely, really. They have the power to change how we live, what foods we grow, what our weather is. And as I mentioned, in women, we ourselves have our own kind of wild menstrual cycles. And these are all powerful cycles that help us harness our power if we can listen in deeply and adapt with them. And before I go on to that, of course, other wild cycles teach us things too. So the moon itself moves through its different phases continuously, and it's so powerful that it moves the oceans. And actually, there are a lot of books out there that talk about the ways that a woman's creative power is in fact literally contained deeply within her menstrual cycle. And often even the menstrual cycle is called the moon cycle because of how similar it is to the wild cycle of the moon. And I'm hoping very soon to have a guest on to speak to this topic itself. But I also have previously interviewed in a previous series that I did a lovely couple of women called Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Walitza on this topic. And I can highly recommend their book, Wild Power, which shares on the hidden power of our menstrual cycle and how it can help us harness our creativity. And this isn't just an idea. There's so much out there on the cycles of nature and how they impact our creative cycles. Definitely, I am very deeply in touch with my menstrual cycle and how this impacts my creativity and how it can support my creativity as well. So I very much try and work with my body to create, and I highly recommend that book. But other examples, there are many holistic paradigms that explore the seasons. So Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, for example, shares a lot around how the seasons particularly impact our health. And a while ago, I studied yin yoga in Bali, and the Chinese meridians form a huge part of that. So this is traditional Chinese medicine. Within traditional Chinese medicine, there are 5 seasons, and these are winter, spring, summer, late summer and fall, and or autumn, as we say in the UK. And each season has many associations that can help us change our habits for a more balanced mind and body. So you can really begin to get an understanding of yourself by diving into this lens, this model. And when these systems were being developed, just to point out and bring it back to nature in the wild, is people were living in total harmony with nature. So I just wanted to bring this in, really not to teach you Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, but to illustrate to you how nature's wild seasons do really have a significant part in how we can actually create magical lives and live in harmony, and use the wild to begin to embody who we came here to be. So just for an example, in the Chinese medicine wheel, we've got winter, which is the water element associated with trust and fear, and that would show in the kidney meridians, which meridians are like the energy centers of the body. And then we've got spring, which is the wood element, which is associated with compassion, anger, and shows in the liver and gallbladder meridians. We've got summer, which is the fire element, associated with love and hate, and shows in the heart, small intestine, and heart protector meridians. Late summer is the earth element, associated with contentment and neediness, and shows in the spleen, pancreas, and stomach. And autumn is the metal element, associated with letting go and grief, and shows in the lung and large intestine meridians. So you can see here again how understanding the seasons of the wild and harnessing their power according to traditional Chinese medicine really does allow for us to begin to understand ourselves better and discover our bodies better. So for example, if you are in autumn and you're experiencing grief, this will potentially show in the lungs. And yes, it's just really interesting how there's kind of like seasons associated with different things. But for example, the water element, for example, is winter. So that's all about our capacity to deal with stress, rest, courage, and trusting in the flow of life, which makes sense with water. But this governs certain parts of the body. So as I mentioned, the kidney energy, which actually contains our essence. So this serves as a lens to understand how if we spend too much time in winter season in the water element, in fear, then perhaps this will manifest as overworking, overthinking, overstressing, overburdening ourselves. Then there will be an imbalance, which also impacts our motivation and obviously our magic. So kidney energy governs our will. When we have healthy kidney energy or winter energy or water energy, we can align our soul will with divine will, which is what we're talking about, this co-creation. And this can empower us with focus to serve our higher purpose. So again, this is what we're diving into now, is just getting a little bit complex perhaps to begin with, and it just illustrates so much to dive into in terms of the 5 elements. But as a lens, the Chinese medicine system really does take a lot from nature, and that's really my point here, is to help you see that nature can teach us so much about ourselves, and it helps us to understand ourselves via the seasons of the wild. So don't get caught up in trying to understand the 5 elements. The content at this point really isn't that important for you to get your head around, or even how it works. There's a lot to it. It's very, very deep. But I'm just sharing it because it so clearly highlights how the wild is really contained within our very essence, and how even just as a lens, the seasons can help us begin to discover ourselves much, much deeper. So, to sum it up, the divine feminine cycles of life, the embrace of Mother Earth, teach us how we can begin to take the early steps into liberating the witch wound and embodying our soul's unique gifts, if we choose to begin to let them speak to us. So for a secret witch who really is here to actually tread the path of liberating herself from the witch wounds, of disconnection to her truth, of hiding her true self, and instead begin to reconnect to her intuition and fully reclaim her gifts despite the fear of being outcast. So for the woman who's devoting herself really to living her truth, to walking her unique soul path, you can see how embodied rewilding in alignment with Mother Earth's cycles is kind of essential. And of course, you're here to really get an understanding of how you can actually embody nature's wild cycles. So hopefully I haven't scared you away with all of that. But yeah, I'm going to get into the practical stuff about how we can do this now. So it might seem that rewilding in nature and aligning yourself with the natural cycles of the planet is really not that bold a step. When we first came into this conversation, I can see how that might just seem, well, I'm just going to go out and connect with nature. Doesn't seem like going for a walk is that scary. But when you put it in the context of why we're going to reconnect with nature, and if we connect with the intention as a witch of really going into rewilding with this intention of not just stepping out for a nice walk in nature, but really reconnecting with Mother Earth's cycles so that we can embody our fullest power and really harness nature so that we can live in alignment with the fullest expression of our soul, it's likely that as a woman who doesn't know her power, that is going to be quite terrifying. So it's gone from just being a nice walk in nature to a walk in nature to fully embody our soul. That's what makes it edgy. And I did mention that a little bit earlier, so I'm just coming back to that because it's likely that as a woman who doesn't know her power at this point, that's why you're a secret witch, even if you have been connecting with the world, you've likely not been doing it with that deeper intention, that deeper purpose of actually connecting deeper with your soul path. So you'll likely have been unconsciously connecting with nature just to enjoy nice time outside, or even to kind of connect with the Ascension Path and seeing how you are part of nature, which also is not an edgy thing, because actually that's just kind of opening our eyes to how life is working. The Ascension Path isn't really that edgy. But the moment we begin to intentionally harness all of this stuff, that is when it becomes scary. And so this intentional co-creation with the wild is what makes it an edgier step into the path. So as I said, my favourite quote, the wild has secrets to tell you that you won't have been available to hear before until now. And that is if you choose to be intentional about your connection with the wild, about your soulful embodiment of the wild. So, with that in mind, one of the first things I'd like to invite you into is some powerful inquiry. Now, inquiry is always necessary as a first step into a ritual practice, as it helps us to illuminate the old beliefs and stories before then liberating them and embodying new ones. So inquiry is always a powerful first part of the path. So I invite you to begin to notice how far you're already embodying nature as a really powerful first step before deciding how you can more fully begin to embody Mother Earth cycles. And this is an invitation to be as honest about this as you can, with love, because there is nothing to beat yourself up about here. Even if we have a sense that spending time in nature is important, we often don't really intentionally connect with it. The secret witch often doesn't live life intentionally at all because she hasn't been aware of the importance of it. But intention is everything. Now, the other thing is that we're just simply not taught in our modern spiritless society how to connect with nature in our bodies and souls. It's not really your average everyday kind of path, which is why, again, it's edgy. So we're just not taught the importance of doing this intentionally. So please, as you do enter this inquiry, I invite you to let yourself off the hook and use this inquiry as a way of simply illuminating the next aligned actions available for you to choose into. So I've got some questions for you that you might want to pause and note down, or do whatever you want with, but the invitation is into this inquiry. So the inquiry is: how far do you currently listen to your body, and how far are you intentionally in tune with the cycles and rhythms of your own body? And how far are you embodied in nature? How often do you intentionally connect to nature and its powerful wild cycles? And then once you've considered that, finally, the next question is: are you ready to choose into getting out into the wild as a way of intentionally stepping into the fullest expression and embodiment of who you came here to be? Are you willing to liberate your witch wounds of hiding and step into your fullest embodiment of your soul truth? Because that's really what we're talking about here, is immersing ourselves into the cycles of life so that we can become the fullest expression and embodiment of who we came here to be. So are you willing to choose that? And again, I would invite you to sit with this inquiry, because it's likely there'll be some costs to fully really choosing this way of being. And there will also be some benefits, and that makes a powerful inquiry of its own to finish this inquiry off. For example, what are the costs and benefits of me choosing to rewild in nature? And this may mean, for example, a cost may be that your family might have to find some of their own ways to provide for themselves whilst you do spend time immersed in nature. So that could be a cost. A benefit might be that you can finally fully give yourself permission to become yourself, your true self. And this inquiry itself, again, is a really important one to be able to make a conscious decision on whether you want to rewild. And again, as I said earlier, it might seem like a really light decision if you don't do this deep work. To decide to go out in the wild can seem like a really easy decision, but when we're actually using the wild as a way of fully committing to ourselves, we have to be entirely devoted to the path of soul, and that requires a lot more than just going for a walk. And that got heavy for a minute there. That's what Friday 13th will do for you. So if it is your choice to consciously devote yourself to the rewilding process within the container of being held by Mother Earth cycles as you dive into your soul path, then keep listening. So here are a few ways that you can do that. And again, of course, there's no real right or wrong way that you can begin to embody the power of Mother Earth cycles. So once you've decided, once you've chosen, just really going out into nature with the intention of reclaiming your wild witch is a great first step to begin the journey. And of course, I'd invite you to do this consciously and intentionally, with the purpose of actually soulfully embodying the power of Mother Earth cycles, because everything that we do as witches must be intentional, otherwise there's really no point doing it. Hence the earlier inquiry, to intentionally devote yourself to this path. So your aim as a secret witch, stepping out into nature with intention, is really to begin to discover the path of soul for yourself, for you to begin to become more deeply attuned with the signals of your body, for you to learn more about Mother Earth's cycles so that you can discover yourself, your dreams, your heart's deepest longings, your body's signals, and your own wisdom. So step a foot into nature with that intent, and then stay open to receiving guidance from Mother Earth, and you'll begin over time to become more and more in tune with yourself and your power. And the kind of synchronicities that occur when you do begin this are quite astounding. So I do invite you into that conscious, intentional co-creation with the wild and rediscovery of yourself within the wild. So this really is about you liberating yourself of a lifetime of the witch wound. And if I haven't made it quite clear what the witch wound is, that is basically hiding yourself for fear of being burned at the stake or outcast. So, and again, I'm exploring the witch wound in my Witch Wound Provocateur series in my Facebook group. So do join us in the Secret Witch Circle Facebook group if you want to dive more into the witch wound. But really, this is all about liberating yourself of a lifetime of that witch wound and fully creating the safety for yourself to truly discover you within the beautiful, soft, loving hands of the divine feminine Mother Earth and her cycles of rebirth. So yeah, wow, that got me. I got goosebumps now from that as I just said that. So still got them. Powerful stuff, huh? Okay, so here is one powerful practice if you're looking for something more practical than what I've just shared. Obviously, you can use your intuition to create your own, but this one is particularly good if you want to connect deeper to yourself and become more in tune with your dreams, with your soul. A really good activity is to try and get out every day for a walk in which you're open to discover more about your true self. And I'd invite you to let your belly button lead you, so don't necessarily take the same path that you've always trodden, but explore the world through a new lens. And as you do, go out and walk, and again, if your kind of intention is to get more in tune with the kind of cycle, again, you could do this at night. You could do this when the moon is out, so that you're doing it like to connect with the energy of the moon as well. But if you're doing it in the day, that's fine too. So, but when you do go out for a walk, you'll find a spot that feels like home. And I call mine, I've got my tree that I go to and go and visit. And be aware of intentionally finding this spot, and when you found it, then just begin to settle down and allow yourself to be held by Mother Earth i.e. the ground, and tune into the sensations in your body, and that itself is a powerful practice. But if you want some deeper reflection, then things like, what is your body trying to tell you? What sensations are you feeling in your body right now, and what are they here to let you know? And even wider than that, what is nature itself trying to whisper to you if you listen deeply enough? Now, again, the secret witch is usually here for a life of more than the mundane life that she has, and often she doesn't even necessarily realise this at first, because her power is even hidden to her. Often is her desire is hidden to her. So over time, as you begin to feel safer in nature and more attuned with your body, you may well begin to hear the whispers of your soul in the quiet alchemical space of the wild. So you'll have to be open to this, and it can be quite scary, can bring up quite a lot of fear to begin with. Whenever we try to get in touch with our dreams, often if we don't give ourselves permission to not act on them and just hear them, we can kind of lock up and reject it, because it can seem too disruptive. So again, don't worry if you can't answer this question immediately. Don't worry if you can't access it, or indeed if you kind of feel quite constricted and closed over. But as you spend more and more time connecting in the wild, you may get a sense for being able to answer the question, what are the deep stirrings of your soul that you've been ignoring? And again, as you allow yourself to spend more and time in Mother Earth's embrace, being really held by her, you'll likely find that you're more available to receive wisdom around what is truly aligned with your soul. So find that sit space out in nature. It doesn't have to always be the same place, but find that sit spot and allow yourself to receive, because it's not often that we do allow ourselves to receive. And again, that's a conscious intention that we have to put out there. So now, I talked a little bit about the moon, but one of the other really powerful ways to connect with Mother Earth's cycles and rhythms, and particularly this is helpful if you're experiencing a disconnect to your feminine cycle. And by disconnection, I mean you may be experiencing pain, you may be experiencing a irregular cycle, You might just simply be completely unaware of your cycle. Now, if that is you, then the best way to rewild, and the most important way of really stepping into embodying your soul's gifts and getting intimate with your body, which after all is where your soul gets to express, and literally without being in communion with your body, you can't actually be living a soul-led life. Anyway, the best way to embody your soul is via harnessing the power of the moon. Now, again, I mentioned Selena talked about this in the last episode, but Selena Walker, who's a naturopath, an amazing naturopath actually, and she's my naturopath, so of course. So she talked about moon bathing in the last podcast episode, and I literally love this idea so much. And I didn't really even realise that's what I've been doing when I've been out in my new moon and full moon rituals. But yeah, ultimately, I'd invite you to become more conscious of the moon and its cycles and begin to track the moon and your menstrual cycle and see how the two align and how your symptoms might actually correlate to the moon cycle as well. And in order to become more in tune, I'd really recommend the moon bathing that Selena mentioned. So basically, get outside, bathe in the light of the moon, particularly full moon, so that your body really knows where it is in its own cycle. And literally, it astounds me when she said that. I was like, wow, because we would think of doing that with the sun to get our vitamin D. So why do we not have the same deep appreciation for the divine feminine moon? And yeah, I always say that anything in nature that reminds your body what it should be doing is really worthwhile doing. So if you've been suffering with your cycle, it's a really good sign that you're disconnecting and shutting yourself off from the cycles of nature. And it's also likely that this is potentially an unconscious form of sabotage of you living your soul path, because actually we do unconsciously create distractions, and it's so common. I see this so many times, and also I do it myself, so I know this well. It's so common along kind of walking the path of soul for us to begin to create unconsciously some distractions that get in the way of us actually truly harnessing our power, until we can see it and become then more intentional, more conscious in harnessing our power. So do get outside and bathe under that full moon. I have actually noticed my own cycle becoming in alignment with the moon recently, and this month, in fact, it literally did become in complete alignment with the moon, and I have been moon bathing, so I find that really, really interesting. Now, also, as a secret witch, it's potentially common that you have already been playing with moon rituals for fun. Not to say that that is exclusively true, but you might have done some rituals at new moon or full moon. But again, I'd invite you here to become really intentional about the rituals that you're designing, and think about using them to harness your intention of reconnecting with your body, your wisdom, and with the cycles of Mother Earth. So you might choose to focus initially on the new moon and the full moon phases of the moon, and perform rituals for each of those outdoors to ground yourself into the energy of the moon cycles. Perhaps setting your intentions at new moon and consciously releasing what doesn't serve you at full moon, i.e. your witch wound. That's a great place to start if you can't think of anything. And yeah, we also have the free Manifesting with the Moon event as well, if you'd like to join us online in Circle at New Moon. And if you're short on ideas for rituals as well, we also have the Secret Witch newsletter, which goes out monthly with a different full moon ritual each month to help you liberate your witch wounds. So do hop on over to subscribe to that. I'll pop the link in the show notes, and you'll have those in your inbox to help you along the way with connecting deeper to Mother Earth cycles too. Now, we're almost done. But before I go, I did ask for questions over my Facebook group for this topic. By the way, if you aren't already in the Facebook group, it's a great place to be. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous group. And yeah, in that group, you get to choose the topic for this podcast, the one that I speak to, and ask questions. So I loved one of the questions that came back in particular, because it was, how do we connect to the world when we live in suburbia or a city? And I think this is a great question, because firstly it offers me the opportunity to point to the fact that we don't have to literally go into fields to connect to the wild. So the wild is right outside our door, wherever we are. Just look up into the sky and there's your wild with the moon. We're basically human animals. So being outside in general is where we were born to be. And yes, I hear you, that can feel like more of a challenge in a city, but depending where you are, there are usually parks available which you can make use of. And I actually used to live in London and still do pretty much. It's I'm about 30 minutes away, and I would frequently go and hug a tree. And ironically, because at the time that I used to do that, I had the story that London was far more forward thinking than in the countryside, I felt like hugging a tree in London was far more acceptable. So it's really, really easy to get hooked into what other people will think of us. Again, that's a sneaky way that the secret witch will look for love and approval, which is why it is so important to be intentional. So make use of any outdoor space you can if in a city, although the moon is available to you wherever you are as well. And I love actually that the moon is literally what connects us all. I often think about that. It's gorgeous. Yeah, gosh, I feel like I haven't come up for a breath there. But yeah, just to finish that question off, if you really feel that you're not able to connect enough with nature in a city, then you can also bring nature indoors to you. So if you want even more deep connection with nature, for example, I have a little planter of herbs, which I use to make herbal tea, and I'm actually really, really lucky. I do have now a house which has access to beautiful fields behind, but I still have my planter of herbs, which I use to make herbal tea. I love chamomile. And I also use essential oils, which are made from plant extracts and have healing properties. It's a real plant medicine. So when used intentionally, these are all really super ways to connect with the world that are easily accessible indoors. Particularly essential oils are particularly witchy as well, and an expression of who you really are. So they can be selected based on their function and also their seasonality. I actually write a lot about essential oils over on Base Formula's blog at www.baseformula.co.uk because I'm actually one of their consultant aromatherapists. So you might like to check out some of my articles there, and I always point to how essential oils are nature's medicine. So whilst I appreciate it may feel like you're unable to embody the power of Mother Earth cycles if you live in a city, that really isn't true. It's a good story to liberate though. So just be very intentional in the ways that you do connect with Mother Earth's cycles. Yeah, there we go. I think that is literally everything I wanted to speak to for this episode. And as I said, this was a topic chosen in our Facebook group, and I felt at the start I wasn't really, when I was preparing it, I didn't feel that I'd have enough to say on this subject, but I think I was wrong because we're almost at an hour again. So yeah, I hope that has been helpful, and I would love to hear how you choose to become more intentional with your connection to the power of Mother Earth cycles in order to embody your soul. So do reach out in all the ways and let me know, and I will catch you next time. Well, I loved recording this episode and actually had far more to say than I thought. My key takeaways are: there is synchronicity everywhere. Friday the 13th is a day of celebrating the magical cycles of Mother Earth, and it happened to be the day that I recorded this episode. Your wild witch isn't bold and bolshy as much self-help portrays. She is actually deeply connected to nature's cycles, and her heart and her rewilding helps her be her truth from love. Mother Nature reveals her secrets to those who walk her path, and that's what I invite you to do in order to connect with and embody the wild cycles of life, death and rebirth being critical ones for soul embodiment. We are nature, and we also have bodies. Life is a magical co-creation of the divine wild and our wild soul that helps us live our truth. Nature's other wild cycles, like the seasons and the moon, teach us so much about ourselves and our truth, and we so need to listen deeply to create magic. We must harness the power of the world intentionally and choose this path. There is no half-hearted here. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.